And I'm here at VMware Explorer. It's been a fantastic start to the event. And here with Michael from Broadcom. Michael, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah.
Great to see you. We've been connected on social for some time, so I've been seeing your fantastic work. It's nice to finally meet in person. Maybe some introductions are in order to you and your team and within VMware, your mission.
Yeah. Let's see. I work in the developer advocate team within Tanzu. And a lot of what that team's focused on, as you can imagine from the name, is just working in the application development world, primarily with Spring and other things. But we also have a lot of what you might call a DevOps and a platform engineering focus, kind of the operational side of things. And my main role on the team is talking with, to use the term loosely, executives, managers, people who are programming the organization rather than programming the application and things like that. And I don't know, I have a background doing as an industry analyst at places like RedMonk and other things. And I lived in Austin, so I had my my required 2-year service at Dell doing M&A, and I was a software developer long ago.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's dive into developer experience and all that good stuff. Tanzu Platform 10, big release, significant release, new integrations, new experiences. Maybe walk us through some of the standout features that are going to be highlighted this week in particular.
Sure. Well, I mean, two things come to mind. There's maybe three. There's several of them, but I think I think it's always good to start with, and I mean this in a good way, the boring stuff, which is, and what I mean by that are the things that our current users of the Tanzu platform get the delight of dealing with day to day. And I think one of the main things is, especially the larger organizations you work in, the more what we would call foundations, but the more platforms you have running. And, in a large organization, you want to have as little fun dealing with tedium as possible. And so we have a lot of features in there to make it a lot easier to manage multiple foundations. And that's something that, it's just very nice to have. Boring, but very, very effective. And then I think the other thing that I'm really interested in, I've spent a lot of time recently studying up and learning it, is we talked about it in the keynote a little bit, or I shouldn't say I was just watching. It was talked about a lot, is what we call spaces and app engine. There's lots of names for it. And I think similar to the multi-foundation thing, what's interesting about that is, again, if you are in a larger global organization, you have, not only, the joke goes, you have one of everything, you usually have 20 to 30 of everything, right? And so, especially when it comes to the growth in Kubernetes, the interest, and I was talking with several people last night, Kubernetes is kind of like, I don't remember virtualization from the 2000s because I was a developer back then, but it spread throughout the entire organization because it was such a valuable technology for businesses that the business side was like, everyone should do it without a bunch of centralized control, and eventually it consolidates down. So anyways, Kubernetes has a very similar thing going on where there are many, many groups and large organizations doing it. And so what we're trying to do with Spaces is have, basically, I'm putting this in my terms, but have a language, a format, a schema, whatever you want to think about it, a configuration way of modeling what the various applications running across any sort of Kubernetes and any sort of platform is. And we've been working on that for several years, and I think it'll be great to see, over the next year or so, what the community does with it, and also how we evolve it. And then finally, I think every time the Tanzu platform has a major revision, and maybe even minor ones, with my application development background, I'm always interested in the frameworks, the middleware, whatever the kids call it nowadays, but the stuff that developers use. And of course, we've always had the Spring framework. Just I don't know if there's a footnote that validates this, but it feels like the most popular framework, if not one of the most popular frameworks for Java, which is kind of like the language of enterprises, large organizations. So of course, not only do we have just the usual framework stuff, and definitely there's Spring AI. So there's a great framework for making it easier for developers to not have to work directly with AI, which might sound not cool, but what that means is you don't have to deal with that, as I was mentioning, that boring, glorpy, operational stuff. You can just use AI just very easily. Just throwing in a key and having it managed by your central platform people or whatever. That's the way Spring generally works. But there's also some tools that we put into Spring that basically, this goes under my category of fantastic boring things, which is to say that stuff that organizations need every day just to like stay sane with their IT. But we have a lot of things that basically go out and find older versions of Spring and other middleware that you're using and report back and help you upgrade that. And that, I was talking with a bank last night, and that's very important because there's a lot of, especially over here in Europe, depending on which country you're in and what thing you're in. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern from regulators about we need banks to prove that they won't, that operationally they won't fall down, right? Like, never mind the business side of stuff. That's someone else's responsibility. So a lot of banks and this is across the world in other organizations, but people are finally starting to think about like the tech debt that they have and the older versions of things that they have as a business risk, not just like a what would you call it? A shortcut. So, anyways, there's lots of tools like that for kind of like making sure the health of your application estate is good, which is nice.
So it sounds like a lot of focus on safer and more efficient Gen AI application development, which we all can get behind.
Sure.
I'd love to hear some feedback on some of the usability and practical implementation of those AI features. What are you hearing from partners? And clients?
Yeah. So to get down to that, I think like I had I was lucky to host a panel with one of our people, Adib, who works on AI, and also Benny from Mercedes-Benz. And so Benny runs. He's in charge of. They have lots of platforms, as you can imagine, Mercedes-Benz. But his team is in charge of the Tanzu Platform that they run, based on Cloud Foundry, that they've had there for 5 or 6 years. And so we were talking about this very topic, right? And I think usability is a good way of putting it from a developer standpoint. And I think so as the platform owner, his job is to address exactly what you're asking about. How do I make using AI, generative AI services, easy for developers, and also, we'll just shorthand it, safe, like within the parameters that a company like Mercedes-Benz has. And so a lot of what organizations like that are doing is, it's classic programming stuff where you build a framework that hides all of the variability of the various AI services. So just as one example, and there's some great demos of this here and there, that you can see or look up online. But from a developer's perspective, they write their application and they basically, I'm very much so simplifying it, but they basically say like, give me a llama model, or give me like the minstrel the Mistral model, like all of these various things. And what that does at a platform level is it takes that at the platform and says, okay, here's like the approved, Llama or Claude or whatever model that we have worked with our model engineers or data scientists. I don't even know if there's a good term for this at the moment, the people in charge of the models. And not only is it like the approved model that we have, but it's runs in whatever governance structure we want. Maybe you can use the public cloud stuff, maybe you have to use your own, whatever it may be. So it kind of routes that appropriately. And one of the things that Benny was saying that I think reflects a lot of the conversations that I think is interesting is he was making the point that if all of the organizations, all the other auto manufacturers, if they are using the same models, whether they're public or not, they're kind of going to get the same answers. Like, of course, generative AI is not deterministic, but you're working with the same data set. So another thing, and why private AI becomes attractive for them is, this is, as Benny was saying, but all organizations are like that, is they're working on ways of getting their own unique data that only they have and adding it somehow to the model, whether you add it in a RAG way of doing it, or, if you're very lucky and have enough money, kind of like work on your own fine tuning and model building. But it really, I hadn't really thought about that before, that like, especially at large scale, at big organizations, until you add in your own stuff, you are just going to get the same answers as everyone else. It's going to, you're going to ask it, how do I optimize my supply chain in Iowa? And they'll tell you the same way that everyone else is going to hear. There won't be something unique to it. So it won't really get you as much competitive advantage. So that goes all the way back to the usability, both in like how a developer uses it and finds it useful. But I think also importantly, from like a product standpoint, how it's easier for the development teams to like be useful to the business, right? Like to have something that makes their use of AI actually not just generic.
Got it. Fascinating. And you've added new Spring libraries in Tanzu 10 for increased security performance of Java applications. What are you seeing there in terms of enhancing this, enterprise Java environment that gets pretty heavy?
Sure, exactly, and that's another in my. I should probably come up with a new term, but the kind of boring bucket, right? And this has been evolving. I used to be much more closer to the Java world, but I think over the past couple of years, there's been, I forget the names of it, but plenty of optimization in how you basically compile and then run your Java applications. And I'm butchering all the phrases for things, but what that amounts to is that if you can put up with a little bit more compile time and startup time, you have, actually not startup time, if you can put up a little bit more compile time, you actually have much more optimized, smaller Java applications. Now what that means is, from a infrastructure perspective, is that you have, you need less memory and less computational resources, right? And so this is, of course, attractive because, you don't pay for that. Or more than likely, it's not so much that you don't pay for that memory that you're not using or that computation, but it means you can do more, right? Like you can do more with the same, essentially. And so also what's nice about that, and this kind of gets to that addressing tech debt and modernizing your infrastructure, is it's almost like, free is maybe not accurate because you have to do the work, but it's a free way to get some kind of gain, right? Like you just run, you can make sure that your Java apps are set up correctly, optimized this way, and then you instantly get some sort of, some savings from it, if you will. You optimize it without having to do very much. So, and you see that kind of reflected across where you use Spring, and even outside the Spring world, if you're using the right kind of Java VM. But I think, it's a good example if you kind of even halfway decently architect your applications to use something like the Spring framework, that when this optimization comes in something that's widely used like the Spring framework, then you get that, again, for free, right? Like it's just built into there, not something you need to develop yourself.
Fantastic. And how do you see yourself improving the Kubernetes learning curve and adoption rate, something we talk a lot about in the enterprise?
Sure. And I assume by yourself you mean Tanzu. I'm not sure I could have much effect personally. I think the way that like at Tanzu we're focused on like making Kubernetes more usable is really focusing on, at least the way I think about it is, I've said it this way several times, but we really focus on large organizations and how they're using technology, right? That's a very vague way of putting it, but how they're using like the stacks we have, how they're doing their custom applications, right, and how they're running them. So if you look at, like we do surveys every year for like 5 or so years, and as Kubernetes has become more and more mainstream, there's more and more people using it, and therefore more exposure to its like fiddliness, right? And I think the thing with Kubernetes and the, whatever you want to call them, the founders is kind of a big word for it, but the people who did it, right? They've always said that this is, they don't put it this way, but it's not for everyone. It's like at the core of your system. And so it's intended that you build platforms and things on top of it, right? That you make it easier for people to consume, because Kubernetes is more lower down the stack about how you architect, how you configure it, how you deploy workloads, all the scheduling, optimizing stuff like we were talking about. But as far as like someone using it, it'd be kind of like if I just like handed you like a car without seats and maybe a steering wheel, like the frame and the engines and some other stuff. So I'm building up a painfully elaborate metaphor here. But I mentioned spaces before, right? And that's an example of how we're trying to like build out that interior of the car, right? So from a developer perspective, they don't go directly to Kubernetes. they need to know about some concepts and how things do. But with Spaces, what we're trying to have is a way of translating, like, here's an app that I have. I need these services to work with it. I need these characteristics of, you can think of it as an availability zone of like a cloud that I'm deploying on. And what the Tanzu platform is doing is it's kind of an engine for saying, like, okay, you need these characteristics for your applications or your application. Let me match it to a Kubernetes that I'm managing, or a Cloud Foundry that I'm managing, right? Or whatever infrastructure that you have that you're managing. And so that's really like, I think what we're trying to deliver on is that hopefully medium instead of long term, but that medium view of Kubernetes as an engine that's really at inside of an overall car, and you kind of line the car with your nice Corinthian leather and all of the other stuff that you might enjoy.
Awesome, love that. So big picture, what other bottlenecks in the application development process are you helping overcome, solve for? What else haven't we touched on, do you think?
Sure. Well, I mean, over the years, yeah. So I started off at Pivotal like 10 years ago, and in this, as people like to say, journey to where we are now. And one of the things we've always focused on, like we love to draw out these diagrams of, like, imagine that you have an idea for a feature in an application. What would it be? Like when I was traveling here, I wanted to look up with my bank that if I lost my laptop, does the travel coverage that I buy cover that? And it's until about last year, it's surprisingly difficult to do that. Now it's a Dutch bank, so it's very affordable. Like everyone buys insurance, so the prices go down quite a bit. But so you can imagine it's this pretty simple idea of, like, we just want to give Cote me the PDF that goes over the policy, right? So we like to take an idea like that, and for a software developer, everything just takes a weekend. I don't know why they're working on weekends, but it doesn't take that long. And think about what is every single thing that it would take for me to get that PDF, right? And from a developer standpoint, it only takes a weekend, right? But there's all of this other stuff, right? Thinking about the infrastructure that you need for a bank going, especially if you're telling me what's going to be covered, they need to make sure it's actually what's covered, right? So you've got governance in there, tracking the policies, security checks. Anyways, you get the idea. It's a lot of meetings, right? And so what we've always focused on, and one of the things in the Tanzu platform is, let's look at the wait time between all of those stages and automate as much of it as possible. So a lot of like what I was talking about with Spaces, with the way that Cloud Foundry does stuff, how it essentially automates all, well, I shouldn't say all, but most all, I'll use a Texanism, most all of the stuff a developer needs to actually deploy an application, security people to verify it. Like if you draw out that diagram, we really try to reduce the lines that are in there. And we do that historically we do that with build tools, in the Cloud Foundry world with things like build packs that have that declarative way of doing things. Now we have it with this Spaces way of doing stuff, and we talked about the integration with the Spring framework, kind of how it eases using AI stuff so you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, I mean, that's the overall approach we have is, like, if you imagine all those activities, how do we make those lines really short? And it's kind of the perspective we take on it.
Fantastic. So it sounds like, Tanzu, it's really about managing the balance between innovation and governance.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
How do you see looking forward? What are you excited about in that balancing act as you work with so many global development
Sure.
teams?
Well, I think, what I've seen over the past, I guess, last couple of years is there's both the capability and willingness to automate a lot of governance. And I mean, I'm kind of doing that from a developer's perspective. But so there's an example from the U.S. Air Force that they've talked about where they have something called the Authority to Operate, AOP. Anytime you work with big agencies, you got to figure out the salad
three-letter acronyms,
of TLAs and whatever. And this is the way that it works in all organizations, which is why I'm going over it. But what you have to do is every time you do an application development, you have to certify the entire stack. Because historically, and again, this is the way it works in all large organizations, is the governance people don't necessarily trust the whole stack because it might have changed up and down. But nowadays, there's a much bigger acceptance of, as you're saying, balancing innovation and governance, where if you can demonstrate to the compliance and security, whatever people, that the platform didn't change and build trust in the platform, then you only have to, more or less verify that little part that changed, the application part, right? And like that is from when I did development, that thinking is incredibly new, right? And I think this is what I mean by the capability and the willingness of it is I think you can trust that platform a lot more. And more importantly, you can verify that it can be trusted, right? You can track what's changed and what's not changed. You have the trust that the people like us at Tanzu who are giving you the platform, that it's a trustworthy platform. And so I think that's why I think there's the opportunity for a lot more just nice features like looking up your insurance policy in the software that you use day to day, because you can just speed up that release cycle because you trust the platform running underneath it.
Well said. So besides meeting amazing customers and partners and colleagues here this week at Explore, what else are you looking forward to this week?
Oh, this week?
Busy schedule.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely I always look forward to having, all the jamon and all the Spanish ham that you can. And I really like the, I've lived in Europe for 6 years now, and I don't know about you, but like before that, I didn't really understand that like bread is delicious. Like we have plenty of great bread.
We have Wonder Bread. Come on,
yeah, exactly. We have it's analogous to like when you explain like macaroni and cheese, especially Kraft macaroni and cheese. The whole rest of the world is like this explains a lot about Americans, but to us, it's like this great comfort food, right? And I think that's the equivalency of our bread, like just a long loaf of bread, hopefully at the day old bread store, so it's cheap. That stuff is really good, but there's like a whole other world of bread out there. And in Europe, you can experience that. So for example, you get a nice crispy piece of fresh, the Spanish do it not much, a little differently than the Dutch do it, but you get that crispy little bread, and they have this great technique of like some salt, pepper, and olive oil that will spread on it. And instead of like, we would use like mayonnaise, or something. Never put olive oil on a sandwich. And then you put the ham on that, you got yourself a whole situation there that's fantastic.
Well, now I'm hungry, but I will bid farewell. Thanks so much. I could listen to you all day, not just on bread, but on developer concepts, and onwards and upward. Thanks for joining for this quick chat at Explore.
Yeah, it's been great. Well, good luck with your bread connoisseuring.
Thanks so much, Michael. Bye-bye.